Alright mate, how you doing? Welcome back to another Premier League tier list video. The last one I did was the tier list for the best Premier League strikers of all time. It caused a bit of controversy. Some of you were not happy with the various placements I gave certain players. I knew it was going to cause a little bit of a kerfuffle in the comments. That's the kind of point of these videos. And I'm just telling you what I think. You don't have to agree with it. And I'm not going to lie guys, I'm pretty sure some of you are going to be unhappy with the decisions I've made for this video. Today is going to be Premier League midfielders. And some of the people I'm putting in certain categories is going to annoy you. And as usual, you've got to remember what we're looking at here, right? We're looking not just at how good a player they were in their prime. We're looking at how long they were in the Premier League, how regularly they gave those performances, how consistent they were over a long period of time. Not if they were at their best in their career in another country. It doesn't count then. We're looking at titles. Of course, it's essential that if you want to be near the top of the list, you've had some success in the Premier League. But as we're doing midfielders, it's not just about goals or assists necessarily. We've got attacking midfielders, we've got defensive midfielders, we've got wingers. We've got all sorts of players in this tier list. And we've got 5 categories, starting off with the bottom category, which is going to be called Premier League Servant. And this basically is for the players who've been around for a long time, have put shifts in, have really given their careers to the Premier League and been amazing Premier League servants, but maybe in terms of ability, they weren't top class, they weren't world class, they never got that good, they just were always there and were people that you're kind of synonymous with the Premier League when you think about it. The next category is going to be double decent but something missing. I know it's a bit wordy, but it basically means someone who is really, really good, maybe even world class, but because of something in their career, they can't go any higher on the list. It could be the amount of years they spent in the Prem. It could be whether they won something or not. It could be if they played their best football elsewhere. So being in this category doesn't necessarily mean, I think some of you didn't really understand this in the last video, it doesn't mean that if you're in the 4th category here, you're only like 4th tier quality as a footballer. It just means, in my opinion, your contribution to the Premier League is only 4th tier. That's the most important thing you've got to remember. This is about contribution to the Premier League. Do not confuse it with footballing ability purely. The next category is better than most. We had this category the last time. It means they're just outside the top 2 categories, but really, really good player and had an amazing contribution to the Premier League. The second highest tier, just like the striker video, is Premier League Hero, and the hardest one to get into, there's a real elite club just for the best of the best. That is the Premier League Legend category. So without further ado, let's crack on and start with the bottom category, Premier League Servant. Remember, there's loads of players that didn't get anywhere near this list. If you've made this list, you've done good. There's no bad eggs on here, it's just how good you've done. There's thousands of players that didn't get anywhere near this video. Okay, kicking off the Premier League Servant category. Some of you might remember this guy more recently as a manager. He managed Spurs amongst other clubs as well. But in his prime, in the 90s, he was a very decent centre midfielder. Tim Sherwood, okay? He was a very solid midfielder. Played a little bit for England as well. Won the Premier League with Blackburn Rovers. He played a load of games in the Prem, but in terms of ability, for me, isn't upper echelon. But I want to acknowledge him. Well done, Tim. Next up, someone I want to acknowledge, and some of you are going to probably take this, or someone is, and put it on Twitter and say, Spencer thinks this player is one of the best Premier League midfielders of all time. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that he's a Premier League servant who was around and contributed to the Premier League for such a long time and scored a lot of goals for a midfielder that needs to be acknowledged. This person is Kevin Nolan. He played 401 times in the Premier League. He's mostly known for his time at Bolton, but also did well at Newcastle and at West Ham. Kevin Nolan's definitely a Premier League servant in my book. There's only one more name I'm throwing in this category, and some people might have liked to see him higher, but this is going to be Gary Speed. The Welshman, who sadly passed away not too long ago, is the 4th most capped midfielder in Premier League history with 535 appearances, the 5th most capped player of all time, and this guy was basically around for a long, long period of time from when the Premier League started with clubs like Leeds, but also Newcastle. He played for Everton as well, a load of games for Bolton, was always around the Premier League, solid centre midfielder, played a load of games for Wales, managed Wales of course, and died tragically at 42 years old, gone far too soon. And yeah, I mean, when I think of a Premier League servant, Gary Speed is the first person that comes to my mind. There's a couple other names that come to mind, which we're going to see later in the video. But for me, Gary Speed was never a world-class centre midfielder. Maybe just outside that bracket, but very solid. And you've got to acknowledge him. Okay, so moving on to the next category. It's our double decent but something missing category. Okay, some world-class players in here that are, I mean, some big names, okay? But there's a reason they can't be considered higher. First name I'm putting in here is Luka Modric. Now, we know what he's done. He's won a Ballon d'Or, okay? Very recently, just a couple of years ago. He's won many Champions Leagues. However, not with an English club, and Champions Leagues are irrelevant. We're talking about the Premier League. He was only with Tottenham for 4 years. Fantastic player, but didn't contribute enough to the league, in my opinion, to be put any higher on this. We were lucky to have him in the Premier League in the first place, and it was a joy to watch. but he did his best work in Spain. And similarly is Gareth Bale, another fantastic player. I saw him score some worldies, but if we're honest, despite being at Spurs for like 6 years, he only really had 2 amazing seasons in the Premier League, and he was amazing. He was one of the best players in the world for those seasons, and he got him a move to Real Madrid, but again, did his best work outside the Premier League. He didn't commit his career to the Premier League. Certainly not like his compatriot Gary Speed. You have to remember, a large part of Gareth Bale's Premier League career, he had that horrible stat hanging over him where he'd never won a game for Spurs. It went on for a long time, so we can't put Bale any higher. Not denying his talent, these guys are all supremely talented, but for me, in terms of contributions to the Prem, not that high. Adding to this list is Paul Pogba. Again, on his day, one of the best centre midfielders in the world. Hasn't done it enough for Manchester United in my liking, and obviously spent a large chunk of his early career at Juventus. Who knows what's going to happen with Pogba moving forward? If he stays with Man United and he spearheads a potential renaissance for Man United to go back to winning ways, he could end up very high on this list. But in terms of what he's done right now, he's no higher than double decent, but something missing. And the same can be said for Christian Eriksen. Eriksen's not really done anything wrong, and he came to Spurs at a relatively young age. I've got a feeling he's going to be leaving the Prem very soon. He could maybe make a sideways move to a Manchester United, we don't know. But he hasn't won the league. Just like Modric, Bale and Pogba, no Premier League titles. Definitely one of the best players in the world in his position, but there's so many great players in that position over the 30 years the Prem's been going that rank higher. Speaking of that position, I'm throwing MESUT Ozil in this category. Now, there's no doubt when Arsenal captured the signature of Ozil, it was a huge deal. He was considered probably the best number 10 in the world at the time from his time at Real Madrid and with Germany. However, for me, he's never really shown that in the Premier League consistently. He's had 1 or 2 very strong seasons, but a lot of weak ones. He's not even getting anywhere near the team right now. He's just turned 31 a few days ago. And overall, I'd say that his performances at Arsenal have been disappointing when you consider what he could have done for the club, what he could have brought, and there's been a load of factors for that. But when you add to that he's not spent his whole career at the Prem as well, he's definitely not going to be remembered as one of the Premier League greats in my opinion. Another player I'm going to throw in this category is a great player and someone that I very much enjoyed watching growing up. Another player that also moved from the Premier League to Real Madrid, just like Bale and Modric, is going to be Xabi Alonso. So good, helped Liverpool win the Champions League among other things, but never won a Premier League once again. Only spent a handful of years in the Prem. I don't think he'll come to people's first maybe 5 or 6, even 7 or 8 names when they think of the all-time great Premier League centre midfielders. So I can't put him any higher, but I wanted to acknowledge him in his class. And the last name going in this category is probably going to raise some eyebrows, but for me, and it is me making this list, you don't have to agree with this, in the double decent but something missing category, I'm going to put DIMITRI Payet. Now, you guys are thinking he was here for 5 minutes. You're right, he had like 1.5 seasons in the Prem. However, for the short time he was with West Ham, he managed to capture the whole imagination of a club. And for me, personally, not just the best West Ham player I've ever seen play in terms of entertainment, skill, the ability to change a match in a second, but one of the best players I've ever seen in the Premier League. Now, I'm not saying he is as good or has been as good as some of the massive names I'm going to say later on in this video. I'm not saying that. I'm certainly not saying he's contributed a load to the Premier League. That's why I'm not putting him in this any other category apart from the double decent but something missing. I am just trying to say that for me personally, and I think a lot of West Ham fans will agree with this, and it is a West Ham fan making this list, I can't think of another player I've enjoyed watching more. For a tiny period of time, yes, but he was so exciting to watch. For that season, that 2015-2016 season, our last season at Bowling Ground, the timing was perfect. He just made every West Ham fan fall in love with him. And yeah, it was heartbreak when he left, but I am thankful for having that moment in our club. We're not a club that wins things. We're not a club that's always at the top of the table. We certainly haven't won a Premier League. So to have a player like that, albeit briefly, was magical. And for me, he's on my list. Now, the next category is better than most. It's our most busy category because when the Premier League's been going as long as it has, there's so many big names that for me deserve recognition and have done loads, and maybe they've won leagues as well, maybe they've won the Premier League, maybe multiple times, but there's other people that pick them, that get higher up on the list. And if I was to choose one way of categorising this list, I'd probably say that some of them are the best players in the world in their position at any one time. However, if you make an all-time Premier League 11, I don't think right now any of these names would make it. That's the best way I can categorise it, whereas the next 2 rounds we're going to see, the next 2 tiers, are much more competitive and are more likely to be in people's all-times 11. So the first name on the better than most category, he could have been in the Premier League servant category, but because he's won titles, he has to be recognised as better, is James Milner. Right, this guy's been around since the beginning, still one of the youngest Premier League scorers of all time, scored at 16 years old for Leeds, and has gone on to play so many games for so many clubs: Leeds, Villa, Newcastle, City, Liverpool. He won Premier Leagues with City. He could win a Premier League with Liverpool. He's become a bit more of a squad player in recent years, but what a player, what a servant to the league, but more than a servant, better than most. And very similar reasoning is the reason I'm going to put Gareth Barry in this same category. Now, Gareth Barry is the most capped Premier League player ever. More than anyone. 653 games. That is 21 games more than the next most played player in the Premier League. And he's still playing now, albeit at a lower level. He was actually released by West Brom in the summer, but he's training with them now, trying to get a contract, not officially retired. When he arrived on the scene at Aston Villa as a young player, he was super exciting, went to Man City, won the Premier League there. Again, that's why he's more than a servant. He won the league. You could argue Tim Sherwood did that as well, but Barry was higher level for me. In fact, he ended up playing 53 times for his country, and some people felt he was a very important part of our midfield, along with another player who maybe doesn't get the credit he deserves in centre mid, and was also considered to be an integral part in England's midfield when we had higher profile names, is Michael Carrick. And he won the Premier League 5 times. You could argue Michael Carrick should be higher on this list than anyone I've mentioned so far, because to win the Premier League 5 times is unbelievable. He's definitely an underrated player, Michael Carrick. And another underrated player who's won a load of Premier Leagues that's also in this category is Nicky Butt. Now, Nicky Butt didn't always stand out as a particularly super talented player in terms of technique, and he wasn't flamboyant. He was a functional midfielder, and he had the skillful players around him in that unbelievable Man United side. But you cannot ignore the facts. He won the Premier League 6 times. That's 1 time more than Michael Carrick. In many ways, he's one of the forgotten men in the Premier League. He's definitely not going to get in people's all-time 11, but he was crucial to Man United for a long, long time. Now, when we're talking about some of the best players in the Premier League, we can't not consider quite a lot of the players of the only ever team that went unbeaten in a Premier League season, the Arsenal Invincibles team. And there's a couple that are going in this tier for me: Freddie Ljungberg, Robert Perez, Gilberto Silva. All 3 of these players were at the top of their game for a couple of years at Arsenal, did some unbelievable things on the pitch. Gilberto Silva is arguably one of the best central defensive midfielders the Premier League's ever seen. Only won 1 title, of course, and there's other players in that position that have won a lot more, but it was in one of the best teams that the Premier League's ever put together. Freddie Ljungberg and Perez, personally, I remember Perez being a little bit better than Ljungberg, a little bit more effective in terms of end product, but both of them were so exciting to watch and took the world by storm. Another ex-Arsenal player we can throw in this category as well, who maybe goes under the radar a little bit, Cesc Fabregas. Now, he wasn't part of the Invincibles squad, however, he did win the Premier League twice with Chelsea after a little bit of a break in Spain. And that break in Spain at Barcelona, I say break, arguably the highlight of his career, he went and won a lot of Barcelona, is probably why I can't put him higher on the list. But he did come through the ranks at Arsenal super young, and he started delivering from day one. And while we're on the subject of Chelsea midfielders, I've got a load of Chelsea people to throw in this category as well, starting off with Makelele. Again, we're talking about people who are considered the best in their position. For a time being, Makelele was. In fact, the role was named after him. The Makelele role is what it's still called now by some people, in that CDM position. He made it his own. Coming from Real Madrid to the Premier League, smashed it with Chelsea when they first got their money and started taking the Premier League by the scruff of the neck and just winning titles on titles. Like Cesc Fabregas, although at a different time, Makelele won 2 Premier Leagues with Chelsea. And yeah, I mean, I've got to consider him because of just how he was the best player in the world in his position at that time. But he didn't stay around long enough. We didn't get him for enough of his career for him to be any higher on the list. Another Chelsea central defensive midfielder I'm going to throw in here, although now at Manchester United, is Nemanja Matic. Now, some of you are probably thinking that the current Matic, and you're thinking that Man United are not performing and how the hell's he got in the same category as Makelele. But you've got to think about what Matic has done already in his time in the Premier League. Like Makelele, he has won 2 Premier Leagues with Chelsea as well. And when you consider he did this after being sort of rejected by Chelsea and then brought back after he went to Benfica, he deserves his spot in this tier for me. Another player who was rejected by Chelsea and ended up coming back to the Premier League with another club, Man City, is Kevin De Bruyne. Now, he could end up being at the very, very top of this list one day. I've got no doubt about it. He's still got many years left in the tank. But right now, based on what he's done, I'd say the company he's keeping in this category, this better than most category, is about right for KDB. There's a lot of people in this category that have won 2 Premier Leagues, and Kevin De Bruyne is one of them. He's won the last 2 in a row. It's going to be tricky now for Man City to win it this year. He did miss a lot of last season for injury as well, but a couple more big seasons from De Bruyne in terms of assists, in terms of goals, in terms of titles, and he could be right near the top. A couple more midfielders that have played for Chelsea to throw in here. I want to throw Kante in here. And now Kante's won the league with 2 different clubs, of course, Chelsea and Leicester. And I think in time, Kante, if not already, will be revered as one of the greats just because of the story and his ability, no doubt about it. Arguably one of the best in the world in his position right now as well. Mahrez and Vardy, maybe not Ranieri, have gone on to do great things since then, but None more so than Kante. He just hasn't been around long enough and hasn't won enough in terms of sheer numbers to be considered higher, because there's some players in his position I'm going to mention later in this video who have done more for me. But Kante, like KDB, Kevin De Bruyne, could be higher up this list one day. Another name I'm going to throw in as an ex-Chelsea player is Joe Cole. Started at my club, West Ham, and he's a bit of a forgotten man as well in many ways. Had a few injury problems. Also played with Liverpool as well, of course, but Chelsea was where he really spent the majority of his career and his prime. Now, whilst at a young age he was one of the hottest properties in world football, when he hit his prime, I'd say his prime is not as good as KDB's prime or some other players like that. He wasn't quite that level, and some of you might be questioning why he's in this category, but he won the Premier League 3 times. We can't ignore that. And he played a lot of games in the Prem, so for me, he deserves his spot. Now, there's only one more name to add to this section, the better than most section. And some people might have had this guy higher, but not for me. I'd argue KDB gives him a run for his money now, but in his prime, David Beckham was such a good player. But for me, compared to the players I'm going to mention later in this video, the other midfielders still to be named, Beckham's just outside. There's a couple of reasons for that. The main one is that he left the Prem for a little bit of time. He left fairly young as well. He went to, obviously, Real Madrid, spent some time in the States, Italy, France. He could have been around for longer. There's people I'm still to mention that were Premier League ever-present stalwarts from start to finish. Beckham wasn't one of them. And even when he was in England and he was doing his best work, which was unbelievable wing play from the right of midfield for Manchester United, he probably was the best in his position at one time, because we're talking about a right midfielder in a 4-4-2. But in terms of as an out-and-out winger, he was never really a winger. He didn't have the pace. But he was never really a ball-playing centre-mid either. He was kind of... There wasn't a lot of players to compare him to, quite frankly. But I love Beckham. He's a legend of football, no doubt about it. But we're talking about Premier League contribution here, and for me, he's not in the top 2 sections. Now, moving on to those sections, starting off with the Premier League hero, just outside of legend status, but still a massive deal in Premier League history. There's one name in here particularly I think is going to annoy some people. We'll get to him at the end. The first name I'm going to say, and there's a couple in here that caused me some problems, I'm not going to lie, because I thought you could make an argument to put him in the legend section. But the first name is Roy Keane. He's won the most Premier Leagues of anyone I've mentioned so far in this video. He's won 7 of them, right? And maybe him and maybe Beckham could be getting close to some people's Premier League all-time 11. Let me know, by the way, if you'd like to see me make my Premier League all-time 11. It's another video I could definitely do. But for me, Roy Keane is just outside. And I might be doing him a discredit here, because his aggressive nature, his physicality in the middle of the park, the way he played, the way he was as a man, as a captain, is part of what made him great. But I'm thinking as a footballer, he wasn't maybe as talented as some of the other players that I'm going to mention. I think there's better centre midfielders than him, for sure. But he was unique. Like, in terms of Premier League hard men, he's probably the best footballer out of all of them. Other people you think of, you know, the Duncan Fergusons and the Vinnie Joneses, they had their limitations. Roy Keane was a top quality footballer, no doubt about it. And there's no shame in being in this category, but he's just not at the top. Likewise, the same for perhaps a bit of a shocker, but Patrick Vieira, for me, I'm not putting in the top tier. He did leave the Prem with a couple years left in his career, like of really good football, when he went to Italy to join Juventus. And he came back briefly after playing for Inter Milan as well to Man City. It's just a shame we missed him for those few years, but still, let's not forget what he did do. You know, playing in that Invincibles team, centre midfield, the heart of it, box-to-box player, very strong defensively, very physical, but he could score as well, he could get forward, a fantastic player. And if this was just about ability in their prime in the Prem, he's up there with anyone. No doubt about it. But I'm talking specifically about Premier League greats here. And he's a hero. He's just not a legend for me. Because I want to make the legend status, the legend tier, quite hard to get into. I don't want loads of names in there. It's limited. It's limited. Now, another player that could get up and down in midfield, maybe a little bit better offensively than Patrick Vieira, but maybe nowhere near as good defensively as Patrick Vieira, is Yaya Toure. Now, the thing about Yaya Toure is he was like 27 years old when he came to the Prem, so we missed a lot of great football that he spent at Barcelona, but he still found time to win 3 Premier Leagues, and he's quite unique, in my opinion, the way he played. Like, big lad, didn't look like he had any pace, but you couldn't stop him. And he could score some great goals, not just free kicks, but long ranges, powerful strike of the ball. Super fun player to watch growing up. Would be an absolute nightmare to mark. I actually had the pleasure of playing with him not too long ago, the day after the Champions League final, which was an absolute honour. And he's still got it, playing in China now, of course. But you cannot ignore Yaya Toure's contribution to the Premier League, and for me, is in the hero section. Another Man City centre midfielder that I think works his way in this section is Fernandinho. People will probably think he shouldn't be in the same conversation as Roy Keane and Patrick Vieira, but I do think there's such thing as like nostalgia taking over sometimes, and I'm not taking away from what Keane and Vieira did. And it's possible that players can be in the same tier, but some could have contributed more than others. But Fernandinho has picked up 3 Premier Leagues, and I have to say last year he was playing his best football ever. Made the central defensive midfield position his own, like one of the best in the world at it, and he's had to fill in defence this year as well. Right now, would he get in an 11 ahead of Keane and Vieira for me? Probably not, but that doesn't mean he's not a hero, and he's part of the Man City revolution. And that's going to be a huge story in years to come in terms of the Premier League journey. Right, I've got 2 players left to put in this hero tier, and then I've got 4 to put in the legend tier. Now, the penultimate one going in the hero tier is Cristiano Ronaldo. No doubt about it, the, if not best, joint best, or maybe in some people's eyes, second best footballer of all time. Okay? How can you not be in the top section? Because this is about Premier League contribution. And whilst he did make a huge contribution in the 6 years he was at Manchester United, he obviously blossomed massively in his time at Real Madrid and just went to a whole new level and, you know, stopped being a midfielder completely. But he was a out-and-out winger in his time at Manchester United. Scored some great goals, 84 of them precisely in the Premier League for Manchester United. Just scored his 700th career goal very recently, which is insane. He's the youngest player ever to reach that number. But he did take a little bit of time to settle in. He joined at a young age. I think it was 18 when he came to United from Lisbon. And he changed as a player a lot. He started off doing the skills, trying to be a crowd pleaser, but then had to learn to be more practical, more effective in games, which he definitely did. I was toying with Ronaldo, putting him lower. I definitely couldn't put him higher. I knew he couldn't be in the legend section. But he is one of the best footballers of all time. And to have him in the Prem at all was an absolute honour and a dream. And I got to see him play live for Man U a few times, usually smashing goals in against West Ham. And he too found time in his 6 years at United to win 3 Premier League titles. So he still had a pretty good run. He also won the Champions League for what it's worth with Man United, although we're not considering that. So Ronaldo, for me, in hindsight, did he contribute the same amount to the Premier League in terms of history as Roy Keane? Probably not, but I'll put him in the same category still. Now, the last name to go in the Premier League hero category was the hardest for me. The hardest for me to place. I think it's going to annoy some people. It's annoying me, to be honest. But I just, looking at the reasoning, and I just don't think I can put him on the same level as some of the people I'm putting at the top. And that player is Steven Gerrard. Now, there's no denying Stevie G was one of the best centre mids in the world for a long, long period of time. And he stayed his whole career pretty much in the Premier League. Obviously moved to LA Galaxy at the tail end of it. Played over 500 times in the Prem. Scored over 100 goals, 120 league goals. Is amazing for a midfielder. He's the 18th top goal scorer of all time in the Prem, in fact. But he never won it. He never won the Prem. And I can't take this into too much consideration, but it was technically his era that hurt Liverpool's title challenge that year with Brendan Rodgers. They did really well with Suarez when he fell over against Chelsea. You know, I don't want to... I think too many people make a big deal out of that, and it's certainly not really come into my thinking in this. But yeah, he didn't win the Prem overall in a long, long stint with Liverpool. So for that reason, I'm going to put him just outside. Now, there's going to be people that are saying he should be in the top tier. And I get it. And do you know what? I probably could be persuaded, but this is the conclusion I've come to. And I don't think there's any shame in being alongside Patrick Vieira and Roy Keane, for example. Roy Keane won 7 Premier Leagues. Gerrard won none, and I've put them together. I don't think there's any shame in that at all. And yeah, sorry Stevie G, but you're not quite Premier League legend in this particular tier list because I've been very selective on the 4 that made it. So let's take a look at the 4 that did make it. Now, Roy Keane as a Man United midfielder didn't. There's a couple that did. We all know how dominant Man United were for the first 20 or so years of the Premier League. And 2 players that were just synonymous with that whole journey, class of 92, etc. Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs. They've just quite simply got to be in here. Ryan Giggs is the 2nd highest capped player in Premier League history, only beaten by Gareth Barry. 632 games. Phenomenal. Phenomenal, Ryan Giggs. He reinvented himself. He was a pacey left winger, became a centre midfielder, played to such an old age, or relatively old age for a footballer. So impressive. Paul Scholes, I feel sorry for, because he was 1 game away from his 500th Premier League game. He played 499. Came out of retirement to help Sir Alex Ferguson as well, and they won the league when he came back. So great stories. And what a player Paul Scholes is. And there's always been that debate between the Gerrards and the Giggses and the Paul Scholeses, who's the best midfielders in the Prem. But Scholes is right up there. When I think of the centre mid debate, I think of Paul Scholes as being maybe the best passer. They're all exceptional passers, but his long range passing and the stories and training of him being able to hit trees that are 100 metres away and stuff like this, like Paul Scholes is right up there as one of the best passers in the world. You know, I think Xavi at Barcelona used to idolise him. He used to ask Sir Alex Ferguson, how's Paul Scholes and stuff like that. When you consider Xavi is probably considered the best passer of the ball of all time, and that's an amazing compliment. And you've got to look at the honours these guys have received. In terms of Premier League titles, they just destroy everyone else. Right, Paul Scholes has won 11. 11. Roy Keane was on 7. Scholes, 11 Premier League titles. Ryan Giggs, 13. Imagine winning 13 Premier League titles. Some people's career doesn't last 13 years. Most people probably doesn't. He's been around that long that he's even had the bad seasons in between. he's managed to win 13 Premier League titles. In terms of honours and domination, Giggs is probably the best Premier League player of all time. I don't think anyone else gets near him. But there's a couple more players I want to add to this category. One of them's still playing, but we're going to start off with the one who isn't playing, but is managing now in the Premier League, at Chelsea, back at the club where he made his name truly stand out, Frank Lampard. Now, again, there's a debate between the Scholes and the Lampards and the Gerrards and who's better and who's not. But we're talking about Premier League contribution. For me, Lampard, clearly, in the way I'm doing this tier list, is ahead of Gerrard for a couple of reasons. He's won the Prem multiple times, Gerrard never did. He's scored a ridiculous amount of goals. He scored 20 goals so many times in one season for a midfielder. It's ridiculous. 3 Premier League titles he got. And I don't know why it is, but I always feel like Lampard doesn't have the reputation he deserves. I don't know if it's because he wasn't a one-club man. I know Gerrard technically wasn't because he went to LA Galaxy, but he was really. But because Gerrard and Scholes had their whole kind of one-club man stuff at United and Liverpool, I feel like Lampard doesn't get that credit, or he's not got the people pushing him as much as the fans of the other clubs do. And I'm a fan of West Ham where he started, and he wasn't actually that popular at West Ham when he left, and that's part of the reason he did leave, which I massively regret because I wish he'd stayed at West Ham for longer, but ultimately he was too good for us. In terms of goal-scoring midfielders in the Premier League, no one gets anywhere near Frank Lampard. There's no debate to be had. Even compared to like attacking wingers who might be part of a front three, you know, he still outscores them. He's the 3rd most capped Premier League player of all time, 609 games, only Giggs and Gareth Barry with more. But what's more impressive is he's the 4th highest Premier League goal scorer of all time. Do you know how many strikers there are underneath him? 177 Premier League goals. For a centre midfielder, that is insane. To put that into perspective, compared to say like a striker who spent most of his career at the Prem as well, he scored 15 more times than Jermaine Defoe. Harry Kane, although he's got a lot of time still to do it, is 47 goals shy of Frank Lampard. The man's a joke. So those stats added to the fact that he's won 3 Premier League titles and Gerrard never won one, that's why I've got them separate, unfortunately. It's a completely different debate and discussion if you're making an all-time 11. Don't confuse that. It is possible that someone lower down could be in an all-time 11 ahead of someone else if you're trying to make a balanced team in terms of positions and formation. But right now we're just talking about midfielders and their contribution to the Prem, and Frank Lampard's hard to beat. There's one name left to add and he's still playing, and this was a late comer. I wasn't sure if I was going to throw him in there, but on reflection I do think he's already a Premier League legend. Similar to the Premier League striker video when I threw a Man City striker in the top category, which was Sergio Aguero, for me in the midfielder section, you got to put David Silva. He came to City a year before Aguero. They've both won 4 Premier League titles at the club, and they're probably the 2 people I think of most, maybe alongside Vincent Kompany, in terms of embodying the Man City revolution. And David Silva is someone that's been at the top of his game for a long time, one of the best in the world at that position of kind of attacking midfield, used to play out on the left a lot as well, has dominated for Spain also. So for me, David Silva has to be in there. Maybe not now, maybe people are still looking at the Scholeses and the Giggses and the Lampards as higher, but I think in a few years from now, that won't be a thing, and David Silva's done exceptionally well to make it into this category, because unlike the other 3, he didn't spend most of his career here. He spent a lot of time in Spain, and he's the only one not from the UK. He was about 24 when he came to the Prem, so he could have had even more contributions to the Premier League if he'd come earlier. But David Silva, I salute you. For me, you're a Premier League legend. Let me know in the comments below what you think, guys. Have I got some wrong? Have I missed anyone out in your opinion? Who would you change? Who would you move the most? Drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what other tier lists or football related videos you'd like to see me make. Subscribe for more. I'll see you in another video soon. And before I go, I just wanted to thank you all for supporting my last video, actually. It's a bit of a different one, but it was my video I made in response to the racism in Bulgaria. It's done really well. A lot of people, I think it's resonated with, and it's great to see. Hopefully we can follow it up and make some changes in football and in life in general to get rid of that sort of thing. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. But I'll be back soon with another one. Until next time, don't go changing.